All right, we are pleased to bring you today Troy Pierce and Kevin.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The magic Ammentorp.
Yeah, easiest one. So.
And they are vintage comic collectors that have curated art museum or art projects and been collectors of movie posters and comic books for a very long time. And we're going to ask them some questions today to figure out what hooks them into this genre and what their experience is. So we are very pleased to have them here today. So a little bit of background on you guys, just to give people a little teaser. But Kevin went to the same high school in Japan as Mark Hamill, the Star Wars actor. I think that is fascinating.
At the same time?
No,
He was 2 years ahead of you, right?
No, he was a high school senior. I was graduating 8th grade.
Okay.
Oh, my goodness.
So that would be like any other high school senior is not going to hang around with 8th graders.
Did you know him when you were there?
No, because, we probably walked past each other or whatever on base at the BX or someplace.
Yeah.
And I was at the graduation ceremony when he graduated, but I really don't remember a whole lot of it.
Right.
Because I got drugged there by my parents because we were actually there to see somebody else graduate who was the son of the family that hosted us when we got moved to Japan. So we went there to go see their son graduate, and of course I didn't want to be there at all, so I spent most of my time trying to avoid being there. So I saw Mark Hamill's graduation speech and all that, and I don't remember a single bit of it, except my mom poking me at one point, going, "No, clap," and it was for their friend's son rather than for Mark Hamill.
And he wasn't Mark Hamill,
He was Mark Hamill, but that's all he was at that point in time.
Oh, my goodness. Also, Kevin was the founding member of the Hawaii Comic Collectors Club.
Yes, in 73, when we, 72, 73, got over there, and luckily had some friends who had gotten there ahead of me, and we kind of ran into some other folks who were buying comics and whatnot, and the idea came up from a couple of the older collectors in Hawaii. One was retired military, and they decided they wanted to have like a club. Everybody could get together. We would meet at the library in Honolulu. We'd go down, and they had a nice meeting room under the basement of the library, and that's where really got into collecting, is in meeting all these other people who like to do this kind of stuff, and just had a blast with it. So yeah, I was the number 6 person in the group, and my card was number 6 out of the beginning group. I think there were 15 or 20 of us.
Wow.
So,
And what were 2 of the important comics you saw there?
Yeah, so one of the collectors actually had Action Number 1 and Detective 27. He had both of them, and he would bring them at the meetings and whatnot, and they were in a nice little fold-out book thing, and you could look at them. And, which back then, of course, they weren't anything near what they are now, but they were probably the only copies that existed in Hawaii at that point in time. So had a blast, had a good time with it.
That is awesome. Troy was a member of the Oklahoma Alliance of Fandom, or OAF, a fellow Oklahoman, because that's where I moved here from. And that was from the 1970s, so it's been a bit. But the whole thing was founded in the 60s, right?
Oh, yeah.
So,
yeah, there was a group of guys, and I think 4 or 5 of them are still alive from that time, and they still host an OAF convention. It's in Norman, Oklahoma now, and we go every year. It's so much fun. It's like a big family reunion, and a lot of collectors, a lot of local folks come, but a lot of the original kind of folks that helped start comic fandom come to that convention, even though it's small, but it really concentrates on comics and comic art, the core of the hobby.
awesome. You also hosted a vintage art show at DragonCon in Atlanta. What was that like?
Yeah, so Pat Henry, who who kind of, one of the guys helped create Dragon Con, who's since kind of semi-retired from it. I think his family runs it now. So we approached Pat, and we moved to Atlanta in '98 and approached Pat, and, after going to that first convention I went to there in '98, said, hey, could we do a vintage art show? And he was like, who are these guys? I don't know. We got kind of a real good convention going here. So he gave us a room, and we set up in there, and I remember him coming by and going, oh yeah, let's make this bigger. So then we started becoming more of a bigger part out in the big open areas of the convention, in the art gallery and stuff like that. So we did that for several years, and some of the guys I still keep in touch with, Benno Rothschild, Dave Newton up there in Atlanta, still put that on, and it's a lot of fun. And a lot of artists come by, and I think we're going to have a question later, but we'll talk about some of the folks who've come by to look at that exhibit when it's there, that are kind of well known.
Nice. And both of you hosted gallery exhibition and shows at Pensacon 2015, 2016. That was in Florida. I believe that's in Florida, right?
Yeah.
And it was, the Pensacon 2016 was called Movie Paper Explosion, the image to hook you. What does that mean?
Yeah, we had movie posters from all different years, from early 1900s all the way up to modern days, and a room this big or bigger, and it was just covered in movie paper. Everything from silent movies all the way up until the very recent stuff that like guys like Drew Struzan, the artist, did for Star Wars movies, Indiana Jones, and different movies like that.
Nice, I'll have to go sometime.
And Kevin.
And it was all, this was, pre-internet, so you weren't trying to catch people with the latest trailer that you come out and you put it online real quick or whatever. You had to have something you just put out in the world that would catch somebody's eye when they would be driving down the street or, walking through a store or whatever. And so that's where all this stuff came from.
Wow.
Yeah, and it wasn't meant to last, so it was meant to put up, it'd fall apart, especially the billboards, the outdoor posters. We've got a couple of big billboard posters that never used from the 30s, so one day maybe we'll show those at this convention.
Oh, that'd be
too.
great.
But they're a little harder to get out, and they take up the whole wall. But they're a lot of fun. But yeah, we had really good response to that over there, and we also did another theme show, 100 Years of Comic Art. So we went back from the 1800s, from like people like Frederick Opper, all the way to modern day, with some of the local artists, even like Mitch Bird, who lives in Mississippi, so the whole gamut.
Okay, so now we're going to get into some of our normal questions. You're both collectors of original art from comic books and movie posters, things like that. Can you tell us a little bit about the world of comics and what it means to be a collector?
Go ahead.
It's changed a lot, right? So when I remember my father, he liked reading the Sunday comics. So Prince Valiant, he really liked Prince Valiant, Flash Gordon. In the comics, I remember being a little kid and my dad looking at the Sunday funnies, and he would read them to me as a little kid. And then he would buy me comics. And I didn't really know about collecting or anything like that, even though there were groups collecting in the late 60s and in the early 70s. But my mom just said, okay, you can have a junk drawer and you can stick anything in that drawer. So I just threw my comics in there. And that's how it started, and there wasn't like these fancy Mylar bags and boards and all that. So I remember just taking the, on the newspaper, when it was a rainy day, I would take the plastic off the newspaper and stick comics in those old plastic bags off the newspaper and stick them in the drawer. But then in the 70s, I first went to a first convention in the later 70s, and just like, wow, it was amazing, and things were just stacked up: comics, art, magazines, movie posters just taped to the walls, that you could buy, and that really kind of got it started for me. And then mail order. Once you started seeing in the back of the comics when you read them, there'd be like mail order catalogs. You'd send a self-addressed stamped envelope, and they would stuff it in there and send it to you, and you could buy comics through the mail, and you just didn't want to freak out your mom too much. How much of your lawnmower money you spent on comics? Right. So, Kevin, tag.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, for me, it really all started up when we got to Japan in 1967, 68. And of course, you would always have a host family who would help you when you first got to your next assignment, whatever. And the host families there, as soon as you would show up, your family show up with kids, they had giant stack of comic books for the kids to read because there was one Armed Forces Radio English language channel you could listen to on the radio, and then it was Japanese television, which, not speaking any Japanese when you get there, is really, you could watch it but had no clue what was really going on or whatever, so comics became the thing to do, and, you know, I just got hooked on them when I first started reading them there. And of course, that led into the other things where, like, watching the Japanese movies, watching Godzilla, watching all the old Japanese samurai movies got me into the movie side of stuff. And of course, the base always had a couple of theaters because there was nothing else to do there as far as the other, you know, there was no other theaters unless you could speak Japanese. You went to the ones out on the outside. So all the movies coming through, I'd go to the movies and got to meet the people who worked in the film library on the base because it was a central place where when the ships would come in, they would take 15, 20 movies out on the ship with them so that they could start showing them, and then they'd trade them between ships and they'd all come back. And when they would come back into port, you would have movies that had been shown 60, 70, 80 times and they were messed up and everything. So they had a whole big group of folks on base that did nothing but repair the movies, flip them through the machines, you know, splice them together to fix all the things. And I got to know them and just would sit there hours with these folks, you know, just watching movies on the fast reel or whatever. And it was just so much fun. And it just, as I kept going, I'm like, oh, this is just so neat. I want to find out more, you know, I want to see this or that.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing movies and then finding out that there was actually a movie poster for that movie. And I remember this. So that kind of is what helped drive the collection with it.
Nice. So what was your first or most memorable piece that you started collecting?
Ooh, for me, I mean, probably Marvel Comics when I really first started collecting. And I would really, I mean, it was just looking for anything I could find with those. And as far as the first, I'm trying to think of, I mean, the first art pieces, a lot of my early ones were from friends that I knew, the guys that were in the business or whatever. Probably the most memorable was, I have a piece from the 1890s. It was done by Frederick Opper, who was famous for doing like Happy Hooligan and a whole bunch of other the comic strip stuff in the newspapers. And we just happened to be at this auction estate sale, and there was an original, you know, piece on the wall, and they had it like $60. And I'm just like, ah! And it was in a horrible frame. The frame was breaking. There was the glass was broken, and the mat was all bad and everything. And they just had $60 on it because it was so, because everything looked so bad. But it was like, oh my gosh, you know, I just had to get it. And I picked it up. I was telling Troy and other friends about it, and it took me about a year and a half of research, and I figured out where it was published, which was in an edition of Puck. It was actually the back page of old Puck magazine from 1897. And about 6 months later, one of my other friends was like, oh, by the way, I just saw an eBay auction where this, you know, the magazine is there. So of course I had to jump on eBay real quick and keep bidding to get this thing, because, you know, I was like, oh my God, I gotta find this now. So that was probably my most memorable. It was the most fun because not only was it just a super neat find, but it led to even more researching on things and being able to go look around for stuff and talk to people about it, and people are helping you look for different things, and that makes it sharing it with everybody makes it more memorable.
Right. How about you, Troy?
Gosh, there's been a lot. So my dad was double dating with a guy he knew for when he married. My dad married his second wife. So those two ladies knew each other, and so the other girl's boyfriend was a comic collector, a little bit younger than my dad. And so I walked into his house. He found out that I liked comics. I was probably 12, 13 years old. And I remember walking into his house, and his name's Roger Hill. He's a really well-known collector and writer in the hobby. And anyway, so but then he was Roger, right? So I go in his house, and it's like, there's all these little stacks of comics on shelves, right? And then I look on his wall, and I see this big piece of art. And it's Buster Crabbe #5 cover, which is by Frank Frazetta. If you guys heard of Frank Frazetta, the artist, when he was doing comic book work. And I'd never seen anything like that. It was just unbelievable. Here's one of the masters of science fiction and fantasy art, and here's one of his originals on the wall. And I kind of, I was young. I barely knew who Frazetta was even. And then Roger really kind of got me into probably collecting original art. And then I just started buying stuff through the mail and everywhere in conventions. So for me, there's been different things through the years. I remember going into used bookstores and just being, this is the best thing I've ever found, right? All the comics would be on the floor under the bookshelves. This is the best thing. It's a Batman 100 or whatever it is. And then a little while later, I was on the early days of eBay, and was it in the 90s? eBay, yeah. And I always liked the monster car shirts, beware of Chevy, Ford eats Chevy or whatever, by Ed Big Daddy Roth and those guys at the Roth Studios. And so a piece of Ed Big Daddy Roth t-shirt art came up, and it's the Beware of Chevy, and it's like this big. It's on butcher paper, drawn in like 1964, and bought it on eBay, and it was like my favorite piece, and I still have it. It's up on the wall. But I've got several favorites, and that's what happens is after a while, I think, and Kevin probably says the same thing, is you buy so much, and then it starts kind of whittling down to the things that you really, really love for your collection, and then some of the things you can help make other people happy by going into their collection. And but the main thing is buy what you like, and then you're always going to be happy with the things in your collection. And you're not going to be worried about what does it sell for, what does it worth now, or then you bought what you like. So like when I got this, this was the favorite thing I got that day, right? So Captain Marvel Jr. V for Victory cover by Macroboy, the artist Macroboy. And it's not the most expensive comic book. It came out of my good friend who passed away, Jack Bender collection. He also drew Alley-Oop in the comic strips, Jack and Carol Bender. But this came out of Jack's collection after he passed. And it's one of my favorite things. Knowing it came from Jack, and also there's a page of art from this that I have. And it's just one of the classic covers from World War II. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, a lot of people collect just as a hobby, just because they like it. But what are your thoughts on people that invest as an investment in comics?
Do a lot of study, because if you're doing it as an investment, you really have to know what's popular, what's not quite as popular, and it's really difficult with everything that's out there. It's incredibly difficult to pick what, the next best thing that will also be a good thing years down the road.
Right.
From an investor's point of view, what are the rules that at this point in time that stay pretty true is whatever people liked when they were 10, 15, 18 years old, they're going to want to get it again when they're 38, 40, 45 years old. And so if you want to invest in something and hold on to it, then yes, that's going to pretty much always be true. I mean, I've watched it with when you watch just the whole community get larger, and you see it's not just Superman, Batman, American comics anymore, it was Power Rangers, and it was all these other things that came in, Scooby-Doo and all the rest of that. People who remember it as a kid, now that they're older and everything, they're like, oh, that was just so much fun. I remember having the Power Rangers, this and that, and they will be looking for it.
Yeah.
So from an investment point, yeah, you pick where you're going to look and then realize who your market's going to be down the road.
So how long do you think, like if you bought something that people liked when they were 15, is it when they're 45 that, hold on to that piece for
Yeah,
30
if you
years
hold on
before
to it
it's
for
worth
that
something?
long, yeah, then it'll really be worth something because you'll have a lot of people who remember it and want to go find it again. A lot of times people look at, this made the news. Like, for example, when they were, comic books were trying to write something to capture people, so they did a Death of Superman, and everybody thought Death of Superman was going to be the next greatest huge thing, and it just didn't turn out that way because if it starts out being hyped, people are going to buy it only because of the hype, which means there's going to be millions of them out there, which means they're just not, they're not what investment-wise anybody would be interested in. Most of the stuff, especially with early comics, was because they were meant to be read, ripped up, thrown away, whatever, and so there's a lot around in some cases, but there's still not a lot around. And that's what makes them popular. And now, it was back 20 years ago, the comics were driving the movies, but now that's turned around, and now the people who know the movies then go looking for the comics because they grew up with the movies, and if they get really interested in it, they want to see where it all came from, and so they backtrack it that way.
Awesome. So how did the Hawaii Comic Collectors Club influence how you collect?
It basically taught me that there was more out there than I could ever put together. When you look at, people brought comics from everything. I had Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, Donald Duck, Walt Disney Comics and Stories. There was just this huge array, and so nobody in their right mind can go, I'm going to get comic books. It's like, no, you really need to start figuring out what you'd rather have. And so, yeah, I went with, like the Marvel for a while, but then I started looking at, I really like this artist, so I want to look for things from them. And so I've let my collection passion kind of move along to different things and keep one or two things here, but for the most part, see what else is out there. Go enjoy some of the other things that are there.
Sure. And Troy, what about the Oklahoma Alliance of Fandom? How did that influence how you collect?
I think being exposed to the older collectors and what they liked, and seeing, the places they look for things, the kind of maturing as a collector like they had, and really kind of focusing in helps you realize what you like, You may not like what they like, because a lot of the older collectors really like the old comic strip artists from the turn of the century, right? So that was like the hot, if you were really hardcore collecting, say, 60s, maybe 70s, a lot of them were collecting comic strip art, And then, so some of that's still popular, but some of it's gotten forgotten. It's not in the public realm. People don't see it every day. They don't remember it. They remember things like the Phantom, maybe, or the Shadow, or Flash Gordon and Tarzan. They're kind of still around. But a lot of the early stuff just has gotten forgotten, and those people have collected and passed on. So it helped me figure out, kind of what to spend, what was a fair amount to spend on something, because you kind of figure out what everybody's spending by going to conventions and seeing different prices, and then kind of just refining my tastes. And like Kevin was saying, there's this plethora of stuff out there to collect. You can't collect everything. Helping you focus in on what you really like. And I think one of the questions you asked about investing is a great one, because, if you always buy what you like, and you don't feel like you paid too much, you're always going to feel pretty good about it, right? And hopefully you still like it. And if you don't like it, you can sell it, trade it, whatever you want to do. But there is folks who try to buy for investment, and there's dangers in there. There's dangers in there, because unless you have a lot of money, or you're not or you're not spending a lot, could be okay. But if you don't have, if you're like regular people like us, and you start Bitcoining or whatever it is, dumping your money into things that you don't know what the future is going to hold, on some of these things. Because there's a lot of 1980s material out there, say for movies, but there's a lot of people who grew up in the 80s and John Hughes films, they like Back to the Future, they like Star Wars from the 70s and 80s. So there's a lot of people who like that stuff, and there's quite a bit of material, but it keeps driving, the demand, because there's enough people who want it. But like old comic strip stuff, not so much, yeah. Or even Golden Age comics. So it's got Superman on it, people know Superman.
Yeah.
Or Wonder Woman, who's had a big resurgence since the movies too, which is nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, just refining, I think.
Right. So what is it about comics that keeps you guys still hooked after all this time?
Good point. I don't buy as many new comics as I used to. I mean, if there might be a certain artist or a writer that's pretty popular, yeah, that might be it, or if you hear some good reviews. Because once again, there's a lot of material out there, and you got to be selective.
Right.
Right, you spend your money and your time. And there's, when kids were growing up with these comics, there wasn't many things to grab your entertainment dollar, You might go to the cereals, or you might buy comics, or you might go out and play street ball, in the street, But like for us, we have a lot more things that can take our entertainment dollar and time. But for me, this really rare kind of art, trying to hunt it out. Like for instance, like Wonder Woman, H.G. Peter, who originally drew Wonder Woman. And this is one of the few pieces that still exist by him. So he drew thousands of pages of Wonder Woman, but it just wasn't valued at the time, so it was thrown away. They might have flipped it over and used it to dry up the floor if they spilled something in the studios or at the publisher. So there's very little of his art to exist. And this also, came out of my friend Jack's collection. But something like that, where it's just something that's historically important, great to look at, and so many cool things going on with it. Because the guy who wrote Wonder Woman, Charles Marston, was also like a psychiatrist, And when you look at Wonder Woman, you see things like bondage in the early Wonder Woman comics. Those were kind of motifs that were going on in his thought processes, And if you see the movie about him, it's a great movie. You see a lot of the psychological stuff that he's working out his personal life in the comics, but still in a format that's still okay for kids to read. They don't notice it. But I think artists that are hard to come by, that you really like their style, and that are historically important. That's what drives me.
Cool. And what about you?
For me, it's actually people. For me, it's meeting the people who enjoy comics, coming to things like this where people are here, just being able to see the things they like, talk about the things they like, and all of a sudden you're talking to somebody and realize that person likes the same comics that you do, or likes the same artist, or likes whatever else. And also it's like getting to see the kids around and trying to show them, hey, here's a great comic. Yeah, it's Archie, or yeah, it's this, and sometimes it could be comics that they know the cartoons of. Sometimes it's something they've never heard of before, but it's maybe when you give an Archie comic to this one kid, all of a sudden they're going to decide, hey, I really like this, and there's another collector, starting off, and hopefully that happens. So for me, it's being with the people. The people are just great.
Right.
Well, like this event, it's like we saw a lot of young people. That's great for the hobby. And some of the conventions, you don't see a lot of young people. This one, there's a lot of young folks.
Yep.
So that's healthy And, you know, it's not necessarily that everybody needs to be a collector necessarily, but that they found a home and they found an entertainment home and a place to come and enjoy it.
Absolutely. All right, both of you guys have curated art for exhibitions at cons, like Florida, Atlanta, Georgia. How did you get into curating art? And what are some of your favorite exhibits that you've seen or curated?
I think one of the big things was, there's amateur press associations, if folks have heard of those. So people get together and write articles, and we all put them together and print something and print like, you know, say 100 copies, and you distribute it just to the members, and then maybe sell a few copies. So I think it grows out of that kind of, there's one called Comic and Fantasy Art APA. And so Roger Hill started that one out of Wichita. And so that one started in the 80s, and there just was this tradition of sharing your collection. You know, and what kind of takes that to the next level is trying to share it for the public, because it just, if not, it sits in our houses, right? And, you know, I know every time we bring it out, you know, my wife's like, oh my God, it's all dusty, let's get it cleaned up. And you don't realize it's in dark walls sometimes. And you bring it out and you show it to people, then they know it exists, you know, and they can enjoy it. And then, you know, you're seeing, I think, a lot of well-known people, you know, in other industries, you know, they're maybe famous, like George Lucas. You know, say, George is creating this great big museum now to show off all these incredible collectibles, from Norman Rockwell to Japanese movie posters, because, you know, Star Wars was heavily influenced by Kurosawa, you know, and so there's these great traditions that we're following in, you know.
Right. Do y'all have a favorite con that you've attended?
I like them all. I mean, I'll be honest, I've never had a bad time at any one. So, yeah, my favorite is the next one I'm going to go to. We'll see how it goes.
I would say I really liked Oklahoma and Texas conventions back in the, and even today, the ones that are really focused on, you know, the comics and comic book art. You know, a lot of them become really big pop culture experiences, and they've kind of pushed the comics to the side, which actually kind of, the science fiction conventions and the comic conventions kind of started all this, right? Because the science fiction convention started way before the comic conventions, right? So, you know, guys like Ray Bradbury, Forrest Ackerman, Ray Harryhausen, you know, these famous names in science fiction and fantasy were really involved in those early days in the science fiction conventions. And so just having that kind of atmosphere of just collectors getting together, buying, trading, showing stuff for enjoyment, getting new people to come in, those are the most fun conventions. Now, San Diego in the old days, yeah, it's really Hollywood, you know, it's big, and you can't get into all the events anymore. And, you know, it used to be just walk into the events, you know, and you saw famous people, Mark Hamill, you know, Gene Simmons from KISS, other famous people out looking for comics, you know, out with everybody else. And that may still happen, but now it's so big and you can't even get a ticket. You can't even just walk up and get a ticket and go in anymore. They're so big.
Wow.
So yeah, the smaller cons. Heroes Convention in Charlotte is really good comic-focused convention. Fantastic. Richard Evans in Houston is getting ready to start Bedrock City Convention, which, you know, it's not a bad drive for us, right? Well, it's 6 hours. And that's going to be, I think, a really good convention in October this year. So we're going to have a big art gallery at that one. So kind of excited about Richard's convention coming up too.
Nice.
And then OFCON,
Yeah.
our heart, you know, our Oklahoma Alliance of Convention. Yeah.
Cool.
And for me, I mean, I'll be honest, like, you know, he likes the concentration with the comics and everything. For me, I like the openness of it all. I love seeing cosplayers from all the different arenas. You know, I like the fact that what we're doing today is really not that different than what they did, I mean, almost 100 years ago now when you think about it. In the 1930s, at one of the world science fiction conventions, they had a couple who, they got married dressed up as the characters from an old Lensman series of science fiction books. they dressed as the main characters. They had 40 or 50 of their best friends who were in their wedding who dressed up as characters from the books. And it's like, in the 1930s, we were doing what we're doing today, but today we have all these different arenas to play in. We've got all this different, the anime and the comics and the movies and everything. And it's like, I love it. I'm glad to see all of that going on, and the fact that we're still having fun with this, the way our great-great-grandparents at this point did.
Well, kind of puts things in perspective there. So you mentioned a couple of famous people that you've seen at conventions or go there. Have you guys ever really been starstruck when you've gone to a convention or con and just seen somebody that just blew you away?
One bigger than life character, and probably a lot of folks might have seen him, is Stan Lee, kind of headed up Marvel Comics for a long, long time. So Stan was coming to Dragon Con, right? And, we'd seen Stan in the old days, and Stan was at the table, we used to go talk to him and everything. But now Stan's a superstar, right? And he's got handlers, and they're always trying to move him to the next thing and make sure people are paying to see Stan, and, Stan's, he's getting older by that time. But anyway, so, we talked with Pat and Henry and the folks at Dragon Con. So we'll put together a great big Marvel exhibit for Stan in his honor. And so they were bringing him to it. And so his handlers had him, and they were just going to try to walk him by it, right? So Stan, he's like, he's going, wait a minute, I got to look at this. And so he starts talking to everybody, telling stories about the art. Oh yeah, I remember when Don Heck was doing this and and Steve Ditko was doing this and Jimmy Steranko, and he was having a blast, shaking hands, taking pictures, and his handlers going, come on, we gotta get him going, and he took the time to hang out, And of course, there's lots of other people you see over time, Adam West. You see a lot of these people at cons in the older days when they were much more easily accessible. You'd have to pay extra money to go see them. Yeah. But that moment when Stan just became old Stan. That was great, yeah.
I think probably the most fun we had was, there was one point, this was when I was in Hawaii, and Orson Welles had come over to Hawaii for a short vacation. And one of the people, it was like a friend of a friend of a friend who knew he was there, who knew him, and so Orson Welles came by and just had a little lunchtime conversation with a bunch of us. We're in the comic club because the friend of the friend of the friend had told him, there's all these fans of yours who loved your movies and all the rest of that. And, if you got some time, maybe they could do lunch or whatever. And so we all were at this one place and had a little luncheon, and he talked about everything. I mean, he talked about Citizen Kane and, Mercury Theater and all that. And I was just like,
wow.
It was like, oh, wow.
That's pretty awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Another person who was like it was Will Eisner.
Yes.
Will would go out to eat with fans, and he did with us before. But Orson Welles, come on, man.
That's amazing.
Two icons, one of movies and one of comics.
Wow. So we're down to our last question, which is, how have comics and comic collecting, how has it changed over time, and what do you see as the future of this?
Woo. So, the early, there was the strips, and Kevin brought up, if you look at this, you think about the godfathers and godmothers too. There were women back then doing comics too. But like this 1897 Yellow Kid, which came from our good friend Rich Olson, who's the Yellow Kid expert. He actually lives here in Mississippi as well. But he's a renowned international out cult and Yellow Kid expert. But anyway, so, you start thinking about yellow journalism and all that, and then how these kind of guys led to the comic strips we saw in the early 1900s. And then they started packaging those into comic books. So a lot of the early comic books were reprints of the strips. And then they started putting original content in the comics, right? And so the early collectors were really collecting strips, and they were cutting out strips, from the newspaper and stacking them up and saving them that way. And then they're writing letters, I don't know, Prince Valiant, Hal Foster drew Prince Valiant. So they would write to Hal Foster, and Hal Foster would send them things in the mail.
Oh.
Sometimes a whole Sunday, which
Nice.
sometimes are huge, back then. And then sometimes he got to where he was cutting out panels and mailing them to people. But a lot of early collectors got their stuff by writing to these folks. And I even did a couple of that, but nothing like a Hal Foster, John Foster. But, and then the conventions really kind of started out after those science fiction conventions, the first comic conventions in the 60s, and now we've got these humongous things, where you can buy on multiple platforms on your computer. So you got a comic convention going all the time on your computer. There's content being uploaded, there's auctions, there's people selling like that, There's even apps now that say, what's the hot comic today? And people will buy it, right?
Wow.
They'll pay more money on that day than tomorrow. It's not the hot comic anymore. So I think it was about collecting, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so, I think how we match this tangible thing with all the ways we can collect now, all the avenues we have. And now you have a lot more access to it. Like the artists, they get on and sell stuff online. They'll have shows and shops, and even during COVID, selling online. But the prices, holy mackerel. You can buy something that's really, really rare and old and beautiful for way less sometimes than some artists today. And so that's the accessibility, and rightfully so. A lot of these people should be treated as mega talent and superstars because they're creating content that's coming out in the movies and multiple media. But I think it's a little more challenging for collecting today just because of the prices right out of the door are expensive. And how much of your income can you spend when, right out the door it's $500, $1,000, or something like that. Where in the, back then, on my lawn mowing money, so let's say, on my lawn mowing money in the 70s, I could buy about any comic book I wanted if I saved. Can't do that anymore.
No.
And I make okay money. I can't do it. I can't buy anything, any comic book I want. No.
Well, now don't they have digital comics as well?
Yes,
Yes,
there's a lot of digital comics, a lot of people are producing that way, and to be honest, it is where we are, it's the way of the future. A lot of times, people who are publishing works now, it's cost effective for them to publish online, and then if they get popular enough and people are saying, hey, are you going to put out a trade paperback of all your collected works and everything? And then they'll go to a publisher and they will publish a book and it sells, and then they can keep making money that way. But the digital world is where we are, and that's where a lot of creators are going. I know some of the folks here in Mississippi who've been drawing comics since the 80s are now doing it digitally, and they're relearning their skills to put it in that way because it's not cost effective anymore to get the ink, get the board, get the brushes, get all the rest of the stuff, put it all here, and then nobody buys it. And so, so it's gone that route. I think that's where we're going to see the collectors start. In the future here is everything's, they're going to see the stuff digitally. They're going to see the movies that they really liked, and then what they really liked it, they're going to find out that there's more of a history behind it, and then they will start looking for this artist. Hey, do you publish this? How about, will you do commissions for me and all the rest of that kind of stuff. So that's where I'm kind of hoping comics go more that way, because I want to see them continue to exist in one form or another versus just being totally taken over by all the other entertainment venues that are out there.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of things being said for being able to hold this in your hand, but then the digital, you don't have this anymore.
And because, like Troy said, because so many things have gotten out of the realm of just us being able to get them. That's why doing shows like this is so much fun, because we can bring things out there. People can bring things out, other folks can see them.
Yeah.
They can go, oh, wow, and it's good for them. It's exciting for them. They enjoy it. And we can, help expand the group of people who like this stuff.
Absolutely. Well, Troy and Kevin, you guys have been fantastic. Thank you so much for being here today. It's been great.
It was great.
Thank you
Till next
very
year.
much.
Yeah.